Hello, boys and girls. Today should be Monday, November 16th, 2020. So, your assignment in your Super Text Detectives, also known as Find the Evidence, should be located on the second page, and I will turn to that now. You can see I have yesterday's assignments completed. I did not tear anything out of my binder. I checked off most of what I did, and I have my highlighting in place. Today I'm going to be reading the history of Thanksgiving in the United States. But before I do anything else, I'm going to put my name on my paper and I'm going to date it just so that we remember when we did it. And if it ever does come out, we know who completed it. Now that my name is at the top and my paper is dated appropriately, I've zoomed in a little bit so you can see a little better what I'm reading. I decided to use a ruler to help me and you follow along as we go. The history of Thanksgiving in the United States. Americans celebrate Thanksgiving in late November. Thanksgiving is a day to give thanks for the good things in our lives and our country. But it started because of a special event in our history. In 1620, pilgrims came to Plymouth, Massachusetts, after a long, hard winter in which many pilgrims died. The Native Americans helped the pilgrims learn how to live and grow food in their new home. The next year, after the first harvest in the New World, 53 pilgrims and 90 Native Americans met for 3 days of Thanksgiving. Days of prayer thanking their God for their blessings. They celebrated a good harvest and their new friendships with a 3-day feast. After the first Thanksgiving, many other cities and states celebrated with a feast in late fall or early winter, but not on the same day. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln decided to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. 80 years later, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared the fourth Thursday of each November as the official date of Thanksgiving. Now I'm ready to move on to my questions. So you can see on the left side, I have my highlighters all set up. Again, if you don't want to use highlighters or you can't, you can use colored pencils, you can use crayons, you can use regular markers. If you do use regular markers, just remember there's a chance your marker might bleed through the paper and then it will be visible or you can see it from the other side. So as long as you're okay with that, you should be all set. Starting with the first question, who decided the date of Thanksgiving? One thing I forgot to do before I take that step is I'm just going to go ahead and number my paragraphs quick because remember that helps me find things a little bit easier and it should help you find things a little bit easier too. So I numbered them. I'm going to reread that question to remind myself who decided the date of Thanksgiving. Now I'm going to go back into the story and see if I can find it. So I would like you to do the same thing. You can pause the video and then once you have it located, you can just restart it to make sure you found the right place or the same place I did. Now, if you don't want to highlight because you're nervous about maybe I'm not going to get it right, you can always just take a pencil and underline where you think it is and then highlight the correct space once you watch the exciting conclusion. You should have located the spot where you think it is in the person. I found mine all the way down in paragraph 4, where it says 80 years later, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared the fourth Thursday of each November as the official date of Thanksgiving. Now, remember, I can either just highlight this one little section, or if you want to, you can go ahead and highlight the entire sentence. You can highlight part of the sentence. Just remember, the more you highlight, the more confusing your page can become because you all of a sudden you have all these colors and nothing really stands out. On to yellow. On which day is Thanksgiving celebrated? So I went through and skimmed through paragraph 1 and I didn't find anything in paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. And I keep kind of rereading these or skimming them just to make sure I know everything that's being talked about in the passages. I did find my answer all the way down again in paragraph 4. And this is where it gets tricky if you highlight too much, because remember I said you could just highlight President Franklin D. Roosevelt for the blue. Well, I decided to highlight the whole sentence. And it turns out I found my answer to the question on which day is Thanksgiving celebrated already inside this blue highlighted. So all I'm going to do to highlight the fourth Thursday of every month, I can go back over it, or I like to just put a little box around it. So I take my yellow and I just box it up. How you do it is going to be up to you, but remember there's nothing we can't really fix. So instead of throwing it away, trying to erase it, crossing it out, just go around it and box it up like that as long as it's identified. And I'm going to check off, I finished this one, I finished this one. And this way I can just look back and say, oh, I already did those. I already know. So my red question, where was the first Thanksgiving? That has to do with my setting. Where did it take place? And by the way, on which day also has to do with setting, because the day and the time and the place all are related to the setting of a story. So where was the first Thanksgiving? Go ahead and try and find that in your passage and then restart it and see if you're correct. And I will tell you, this one's a little trickier, and sometimes they're like this. It doesn't, because it says, where was the first Thanksgiving? Well, I found my answer here. It says in 1620, Pilgrims came to Plymouth, Massachusetts. Plymouth is a city, Massachusetts is a state, so that might make it tricky for you in and of itself. But it doesn't say anywhere in this article the first Thanksgiving was celebrated here. It doesn't say that. So you kind of have to read into the story, because it says Pilgrims came to Plymouth, Massachusetts. And then it talks about the long, hard winter and that the Native Americans helped them. And then it says the next year after the first harvest, 53 Pilgrims and 90 Native Americans met for 3 days of Thanksgivings. So you could also say, well, Mr. Idugich, yeah, it could be Plymouth, Massachusetts, but I could also say the New World. That would also be appropriate in my opinion. So you could either have red Plymouth, Massachusetts, or you could have red New World, or you could have both. Moving on to purple. Why is Thanksgiving celebrated today? Go ahead and look for it and see what you come up with. After looking through again, I decided I found my answer right in paragraph 1, and right at the very beginning. Because why is Thanksgiving celebrated? Thanksgiving is celebrated in late November. Thanksgiving is a holiday to give thanks for the good things in our lives and our country, but it started because of a special event in history. So I'm going to take and highlight that entire sentence, and I'll tell you why in just a second. And this is a long sentence, so it's going to take me a minute here. And I decided to highlight the whole thing because we celebrate Thanksgiving for the good things in our lives and for our country to give thanks. But we also celebrate it today because of a special event in our history. So there's really two parts to that. Now, if you only had one, that's okay too. If you said a special event in our history, or you said because it's a day to give thanks, that's absolutely fine. I just wanted to share with you my thoughts, and you can do and answer how you choose. Green says, how many people came to the first Thanksgiving? And I'm going to go back and check off my questions too, just so I know that I've finished them. And then I'm going to read that one more time. How many people came to the first Thanksgiving? So this one, I'm going to leave the camera rolling because I'm just going to skim, because if it's asking me how many, most of the time, I'm going to see if I can find a number first. And that number may be written in standard form or word form like we talked about, but I'm going to look for numbers in standard form just to see if any pop out to me. So I just start at the beginning. I see 1620 here, but that doesn't tell me how many people. That looks more like a date. And then I keep skimming down. It says the next year, 53 Pilgrims and 90 Native Americans. That sounds like a certain amount of people. So I know these two numbers, 53 Pilgrims and 90 Native Americans, mean people. So I'm going to highlight both of those in green, and I can do it two ways. I can just either highlight 53 Pilgrims, 90 Native Americans, or I can highlight 53 Pilgrims and 90 Native Americans. And if I want to, I could even highlight met for 3 days of Thanksgivings. That's completely up to you. But again, I just picked out one thing I wanted to look for, and that's how I found my answer. So I could reread everything, or I could just skim through with what I know to try and find my answer. And I'm going to check this one off. Lastly, in orange, when was the first Thanksgiving? This one gets a little bit tricky too, because your answer you'll find located in paragraph 2. And if you didn't pause it, that's okay, because this one, again, is one of those that's harder for kids to see. It says, in 1620, pilgrims came to Plymouth, Massachusetts. After a long winter in which many pilgrims died, the Native Americans helped the pilgrims learn how to live and grow food in their new home. The next year, after their first harvest in the New World. So this tells me the next year it's actually 1621. And I don't have to write that down because I'm just looking for my clues. But I know in my brain 1 year after 1620 is 1621. So I know the first Thanksgiving was celebrated in 1621. But I find it here in my text with this 3-word phrase, the next year. So once I'm done with this, I'm just going to check it off again, and I'm finished with my assignment. So I'm going to go ahead and pack everything up, and I'm going to put my tools exactly in the same place so that I have them for next time. I put them in my little cup, and I'm going to close up my packet, and I'm going to put it back in my binder, and it will be all ready for school tomorrow. Thanks, kids. Bye.